In the last module, you learned about how addiction can impact an individual in many ways. This module provides more in-depth information about how opioid use disorder, or OUD, specifically impacts the individual. Opioid use disorder is a chronic, recurring disease that affects the body and brain by producing a physical and psychological dependency to opioids. OUD causes many harmful consequences for an individual, including changing how their brain works. Before we dive deeper into OUD, here's a little refresher about what defines opioids. Opioids are a class of drug whose natural component can be found in the opium poppy plant. While some opioids use the natural plant in their development, others are synthetically created. You can see here some common examples of opioids. In the last module, you learned about the scope of addiction in the United States, including that 71% of drug-related overdoses are related to opioid use. From 2017 to 2019, this translated into approximately 50,000 people dying each year of opioid-related overdoses. However, more recently, this has translated into approximately 75,000 people dying per year from opioid-related overdoses. This has resulted in experts describing the current circumstances as the most lethal drug epidemic in American history. Further, an estimated 3 million people have opioid use disorders in the U.S. In recent years, about 10 million people report misusing opioids, such as prescription pain pills and heroin, placing them at risk of future OUD. Despite efforts to increase access to treatment for individuals with OUD, there is still a substantial gap in connecting individuals to treatment. Approximately 80% of individuals with OUD do not receive treatment. This lack of access to treatment is even more pronounced within communities of color. Research demonstrates that people of color are less likely to have access to effective OUD treatments, such as medications for opioid use disorders, MOUD. Throughout the upcoming modules, you'll learn more about how you can play an essential role in helping connect people to treatment and improve their likelihood of recovery. Opioids impact the brain and body by attaching to the brain and other organs, resulting in blocking pain and releasing dopamine, i.e., reinforcement of a good behavior. While this provides momentary relief, there are many negative physical and psychological consequences, including poorer health outcomes, increased mental illness, and potential overdose through slowed breathing that can lead to hypoxia. This video provides more details about how opioids impact the body and brain and can lead to OUD.
This is Susan. Susan loves to bike. While out for a ride, she falls and breaks her arm. Special cells called neurons send a signal through the spinal cord to the brain, which interprets the signal as pain. Susan understands the pain means she needs to go to the hospital, and her body is equipped for survival, helping her not to panic so she can seek help. Many of her neurons are covered in proteins called opioid receptors. These receptors act like a brake to slow down the neuron's ability to send pain signals. When injured, her body releases natural painkillers called endorphins. Like a key in a lock, endorphins activate opioid receptors, slowing down the pain signal and preventing a panic. Susan gets treated for the broken bone, but 3 months later, her arm still hurts. And now that pain is making her feel depressed and anxious. So her doctor prescribes an opioid painkiller. There are many different opioids, but they all share a chemical similarity to our own endorphins. This allows them to bind to the same opioid receptors and stop pain signals. But that's not all they do. Deep inside Susan's brain is a region called the ventral tegmental area, or VTA for short. The VTA is full of neurons that produce a chemical called dopamine. When something good happens, dopamine is released, giving Susan a feeling of pleasure. This helps teach her brain to keep seeking out good things. To keep dopamine neurons in check, inhibitory neurons keep the brakes on until something good comes along. Just like the pain neuron, these neurons are covered in opioid receptors. When Susan takes the painkiller prescribed by her doctor, the opioid receptors turn off the inhibitory neurons and release the brake on the dopamine neurons. The rush of dopamine temporarily eliminates Susan's depression and anxiety, and she feels relief, calmness, and even euphoria. As Susan continues to take the painkillers, her brain responds by trying to regain its balance. Her inhibitory neurons work extra hard even when the opioid receptors are activated, and it becomes harder and harder for her dopamine neurons to release dopamine. Susan finds that she needs to increase her dose of painkillers in order to feel comfortable. This is called tolerance. Eventually, Susan's pills run out. Inhibitory neurons that had been working overtime are let loose, clamping down on those dopamine neurons and shutting them off almost completely. Now, not only is Susan in pain, but the depression and anxiety come back. On top of that, Susan feels ravaged by an inescapable physical sickness far worse than any flu. Susan's body is going through withdrawal. Most people who take opioids for a long time tend to experience some withdrawal, but they can still stop taking the pills and return to normal. But for people like Susan, it's not so easy. Her genetics and the environment she grew up in put her at a higher risk for addiction. Her withdrawal symptoms aren't just unpleasant, they're unbearable. Susan thinks the only way to feel normal is to find more opioids. And this is how the cycle of opioid addiction emerges, driven by a brain trying to regain its balance. But there is hope for Susan. Though the road to recovery can be challenging and there may be setbacks, treatment can retrain Susan's brain. With the help of medication and therapy, Susan finds pleasure in her life once again.
Beyond the impact on one's brain and body, individuals with OUD face many harmful consequences to their quality of life, including mental health and risk of serious co-occurring health concerns, as well as an increased likelihood of being involved with the criminal legal system. Additionally, those in the individual's social support system are more likely to report severe financial burdens, disruption to the family unit, and poor physical and mental health. These are just some of the quality of life concerns that an individual with an OUD may be facing as you work with them. Beyond the individual and support system considerations, there are extreme societal costs related to OUD. Recent estimates demonstrate that in 2017, OUD cost the United States $471 billion, and opioid overdose fatalities cost an additional $550 billion. A part of these calculations reflects the loss of employment or productivity, and the cost of increased involvement in the criminal legal system. You've just learned a lot of facts about substance misuse, substance use disorders, and OUD. Now take a moment and close your eyes. Take this moment to think about all of the stereotypes that you've heard about someone with OUD. Maybe some of them you've had, maybe others you've heard from those around you. What images come to mind with those stereotypes? Now open your eyes. Are these like the words that came to mind for you? Now imagine those words and images, real or imagined, are directed at you in the media, by family, friends, or coworkers. Eventually, when people hear these words enough, they start to believe it themselves. This is self-stigma, and it's defined as the personal endorsement of stereotypes about oneself and the resulting prejudice and self-discrimination. This self-stigma can push individuals even further into isolation and potentially make them less likely to seek treatment. Marginalized groups such as people of color, LGBTQ+, or individuals involved in the criminal legal system who experience OUD face multiple layers of potential self-stigmatization due to how society labels them. These added layers of self-stigma create more barriers to individuals seeking out and accessing treatment. For instance, in addition to the lack of access to treatment in communities of color, there are strong stereotypes within some communities of color that individuals can internalize, such as the idea that having an addiction is a weakness. Particularly with OUD, self-stigma and an individual's response to those feelings can put them more at risk of overdose. As you complete the upcoming modules, you'll learn that self-stigma is only one type of stigma. There are other sources of stigma the individuals you work with on community supervision face regarding their OUD, and even the stigma they sometimes face after engaging in treatment like MOUD. As you work with individuals on community supervision who may be experiencing self-stigma related to opioid use or OUD, remember the importance of humanizing the person and helping to provide hope to them. Remember that who the person seems to be during their active addiction and who they are in stable recovery can look very different. As either the probation officer or community provider, you're in a role that can help the person see past the many stereotypes they may have internalized along the way. You're in an important role to help provide guidance and support to an individual who might be struggling with where they can go next and how they can succeed. In the next module, you'll learn more about effective treatment options for OUD and how you can work with individuals to engage them in those services.